Amy Clow, and I'm the Quarantine and Rules Coordinator with the Plant Protection Division with the Washington State Department of Agriculture. Also joining me today is Tim Elliott with Motor Fuel Quality and Enforcement with the Weights and Measures Program, and Glorianne Robinson, who is the Agency Rules Coordinator. Today we're going to be going over the second draft of the Electric Vehicle Supply Equipment Rule Language. Next slide. So a few meeting controls before we get started. This meeting is being recorded, so we ask that you keep yourself muted unless you're speaking. If you're calling in on the phone, you would press *6 to mute or unmute yourself. Please feel free to ask questions at any time throughout the meeting. You can do this by either raising your hand or leaving a message in the chat. If you do raise your hand, make sure that you push that hand button again when your question's over so that we know that your hand is down. And we're going to be monitoring both of these functions throughout the meeting. If you're calling in on the phone and you can't raise your hand or leave a message in the chat, feel free to just unmute yourself and ask your question at any time. Next slide. So we're working, just a reminder, we're working on this rulemaking project with our collaborators with the Utilities and Transportation Commission, as well as the Department of Commerce. And we just wanted to give a quick update. Our collaborator with the Department of Commerce, Michael Breach, has moved on. And so we are now going to be working with Stephen Polensky, who's going to be starting on February 1st. So we just wanted to give a big thank you to Michael for all of his help and guidance throughout this project. Next slide. All right, Tim, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right, for today, what we're going to do is we're going to start off with just kind of a refresher course and kind of explain, especially for a lot of you that either aren't from Washington or don't deal with the laws and regulations of the state very much, kind of the relationship of the statute and rules, which is the RCW and WACs. And then after that, we'll basically just go through the draft rules. And during that time, we can discuss any of the, if you need some clarification on any of the comments we made, any of the changes we made, any of that stuff. So we'll go through that and then kind of the rest of the process on how we'll get through this and get to our final rules.
All right, folks, good morning. So I'm going to handle this part of the presentation today. One of the things that we noticed in the feedback responses, or the feedback that we got from the first draft language, was that there was some confusion about the role of the Revised Code of Washington, the RCW, which is the statute, we call it, and that relationship between that statute versus the rules that we as the state agency adopt, which are the Washington Administrative Code. So we wanted to just, as Tim mentioned, do a little refresher or explanation of that relationship on how they work there. So the Revised Code of Washington are the laws that are enacted by the legislature when it's in session. They are the overarching parent laws that govern Washington State. So, and as those parent laws, they are enforceable all on their own. They have their own requirements that are listed, and then they will also give rulemaking authority to the executive branch agencies, such as the Department of Agriculture. It depends on the RCW. Some of them are written more stringently and really do a good job of like outlining all of the requirements for a particular subject in the RCW, and some, maybe even most, are written in a way that are more vague or broad, and then just kind of transfer the authority for writing rules to the department, to the agency that will implement those finer details on how the larger statute needs to be implemented on like a day-to-day basis. And so in this particular statute, the bill 5192 got put into chapter 1994 RCW. it's kind of a mixture of some areas where they've went into greater detail and others they've left more vague and have put that responsibility for defining what the details need to be with us. And so together, those statutes and the rules become the primary source of law for Washington State. As an agency, we can only adopt rules that allow us, that are within the authority that the statute gives us. And the rules that we write can't conflict with anything that's in the statute. So just to better visualize that parent-child relationship, I guess if you would put it, we did kind of a little diagram there for you that shows Chapter 1994 RCW being the overarching law, and then out of that chapter, the agency has adopted all 5 of the chapters below it, as you can see in the image. One of them being the chapter that we're working on now, 16-662 WAC. So it's underneath of that overarching law. So that's basically it. Are there any questions about that relationship between the two? Okay, it doesn't sound like it, Tim, so I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. So the first proposed rule that we have for the drafts is about the exemption dates and how this applies to equipment that was installed and when equipment needs to get installed. So kind of basically what it's putting in there is if it was installed before January 1st, 2024, it's exempt from certain requirements until January 1st, 2034. If it's installed after that, then it's going to have to be in compliance as of when it's installed. So it's the first section of this. Is there any questions on this? This was rewritten significantly if you looked at the black line, but there was no real changes actually made substance-wise. It was just kind of making language kind of more in harmony with what was in the statute and just a little bit cleaner. And that was the purpose of that. The next section is where we made some changes. So section 2, we had heard quite a few remarks about what clearly marked and to be able to have it on displays or some other concerns about the price of marking it. So we went through and we added A to kind of clarify what clearly marked was, and we made some language changes to 2. But the 2A is where we added stuff. So it's especially if you see 2A II, it basically allows you to put it on the display. And and we want that, if you read that, it's basically, we want something that's not buried. The inspector needs to be able to come up and not spend a half an hour trying to search for it and then miss it and then end up writing a citation. You come back to us and say, well, it's, if you follow this trail, you can find it. It needs to be somewhat reasonable for the inspector to be able to get to it and somewhat intuitive. So basically it has to be a link off the home screen. So it could be whether it's just directly a date or if it's about this device and you click on it and it has, the date along with some other information, but it's not having to follow a trail past hitting basically one button off the display. Is there any questions or comments or concerns about this changes and this draft rules? Just going back and forth between comments and okay, not seeing any. I'm going to go to the next section. Okay, this is just the end of that. Basically, this is just stating and clarifying that if it's not posted, we're going to go ahead and assume that it's installed after that date. So even if you have a sticker, if you don't use a very durable sticker and it falls off, unfortunately this would fall. I mean, the inspectors would obviously use their some of their brains, hopefully, and if you have a bank of devices and one of them happens to be missing, then they'll probably call and find out. But for the most part, it's your responsibility to make sure that it's something the inspector can find and it's readable and still there. Okay, payment methods.
Hey, Tim, this is Justin for ChargePoint, and just one question, I guess, more than anything. It seems like there's two ways to do this. You go about labeling equipment that is already installed, right? So requiring folks to go and put a label on equipment that's out there today, or go about it from the perspective of placing labels on equipment as you're putting it in the ground. So you've already got somebody out there, installing the equipment, and then at that point they place a sticker on it. I guess I'm just trying to line this up. My understanding of a lot of the other weights and measures provisions, that would take place for metrology and handbook 44 and those sorts of things, have a seal or a sticker placed on them at the install date. And this seems just a little bit inverse to that, and just trying to think through if you guys have thought about, you thought about doing it the other way. Newly installed stuff must have the date on it, and existing stuff, just the inverse of it, I guess.
Yeah, so kind of two things on that is, one of them is I see it like if we did the new install, then you constantly are adding stickers to the new stuff instead of just having the old stuff that you go put it on and as it goes out. I would hope that over the next 2 years, and actually from the time this is passed, you had 2.5 years to start applying labels. This is from the statute, so RCW 1994-190. This was in section 9. Actually, in statute, in order to even just, it's kind of already there that you already have to do it. So that was the other thing, is instead of adding a requirement to the newer stuff, it's already actually in statute to receive it. So it's just clarifying that. So it's not really a new requirement per se. It's just clarification on that.
Okay, understood. Thanks.
Carolyn had a question in the chats. She asks, is this similar to current weights and measure laws for pumps, the sticker requirement?
There is no granting of older devices into newer stuff. All the stuff has to be current compliant. So this is.
No, I'm thinking in terms of the sticker. Is the responsibility of the person who owns the pump right now to have the sticker, or do you guys provide something
for the inspection?
Yeah.
Yeah, so when it gets inspected, when we inspect it, we put a sticker on there, but that's not required to be there. It's not required to be inspected by us. The devices, whether it's a pump or a scale, it's the business's responsibility to be in compliance. And when we go out, when we get out there, which we try to do every 2 years, but because of staffing issues, we're further behind than that.
Right.
But we essentially go out and put our seal on there and the date at what we're out there. So it's not that seal we put on there is not good for 6 months, not good for a year or 2 years or whatever. It's saying at that time when we were out there, it was in compliance.
Okay. And then just to kind of put in the back of your heads for, just technical assistance, if you have, we don't want to put this in the rule, but if you have like types of stickers that work and that type of thing that would hold up, that might be good information just to know.
Okay. Yeah. And actually, yeah, we're coming up we lost the lady that used to order all our stickers for us, so we're trying to track all that stuff back down actually currently. So, but yeah, when we do a sheet, I think we'll eventually end up doing kind of once we have rules and start rolling this out, we'll kind of have an info sheet, and yeah, I'll try to remember to have that added as part of a recommendation about the stickers. Got another hand up. Melania?
Hi, this is Noelani Derrickson with Tesla. Just a clarifying question on the sticker or the requirement to be clearly marked to identify the installation date. I'm looking at the actual bill language, and it does say, of course, that it needs to be clearly marked, identifying the date of installation. But the bill language doesn't specify if that needs to happen on the individual charger, or if that can happen at a charging station level, or where that information needs to be. And so I wonder if there's some ability to provide some more flexibility in the regs in terms of that information could be provided at a site, like an entire station level versus the individual charging post.
Yeah, that would, part of it, I mean, I'd have to look at that and kind of see how that sits. The one thing is, being that it can be on the display if it's using a kiosk or something like that, where you'd actually be able to go on there. Long as the inspector, essentially when the inspector's going out there to do his inspection, he needs to be able to determine without much of an issue what the date is. And that's where, if we look at the it may include, so it's, sorry. So it could be a sticker or plaque, or it could be on the display, but it's not just those two. It's having the may opens it up. So essentially it needs to be clearly marked in a fashion that the inspector can easily get to that date and know that it doesn't have to meet the current requirements.
So Tim, this is Glorianne. I'll just kind of add to your comment there. So for this particular area, it's helpful to go back to the definitions in the RCW where it defines electric vehicle supply equipment, meaning that the unit controlling the power supply to one or more vehicles during a charging session, including but not limited to level 2 electric vehicle supply equipment and direct current fast chargers. So the definition itself does imply that it could potentially, the RCW might allow for it to be the unit controlling the power supply to multiple chargers. However, we've in our rule, in order to allow the inspectors to have easier access to understanding what the installation date is for a particular unit, we've defined in our rule language that we want it on the front of the device. So we've kind of merged the two requirements there.
Do you have anything else, Melanie?
Yeah, this is Noelani again. And maybe I can take this conversation offline a little bit more to dig in here. I think our recommendation would be to maintain some of the flexibility in the bill language so that it isn't specific to the individual charger, and that that information can be provided adequately at a site level. It wouldn't necessarily require 20 stickers, but it could be one sticker, or it could be one way to communicate the installation date for every single charging port. And that would meet the requirements per the bill language.
Okay. Yeah, and we'll definitely have to look into that too, because the other one thing I am concerned is on that, because you have two things that this would be applying to. It's kind of the rules that we're working on, but also be applying to Handbook 44 stuff when it comes in. So if you have mixed equipment on site, I'd be a little concerned that you might be meeting these rules with some of the newer equipment. You may update it, because a lot of the stuff I think would be fairly easy to update over time, potentially with just updates of software or whatnot. an add-on of equipment, but it may not meet the handbook 44 requirements when they come out. So we need to be able to make sure that whatever it is, if you have mixed equipment, that you're not using you have one charger that's on site that you're trying to use to cover everything else. And that way all the equipment is fully
and it's scheduled for
in compliance with whatever the regulation is.
On the 28th, and you wanted to get a sort of update of what was going on there. And I haven't been really following this bill, so I was wondering if you could help with that. I'm also going to call Stephanie and see if she knows. Thanks. Bye now.
All right, sorry about that. I disabled her mic. Any other questions on compliance dates? All right, I'm gonna move on. Okay, payment methods. So with this section, the biggest thing is we did add also the EMV chip at the end of that. And I know there's some confusion. A lot of people they may have been, it is written a little confusing, but these are, you can, as long as you meet one of these three payment, as long as you have these three payment, like three of the 5 payment or 6 payment methods, you can have other payment methods that look similar but don't meet those requirements. You just have to have at least 3 of your payment methods meet these requirements. And at least one of those has to be able to be made by a credit card, a debit card, or a prepaid type card. And I'll go through the different ones. So about a handful of slides just kind of covering them so you can read through them. So the first of the 6 options, you have a toll-free number to call or a call button that's on the device. You have a credit card reader that's on there, and that credit card for this, you can actually, contactless is an option if you're going through this method. But if that's your only way to pay with a credit card, then obviously contactless wouldn't work because you all need to meet that first requirement that's in the upper paragraph that has a credit card requirement. You have a mobile payment method with the requirement to download an app. 5 and 6 is a mobile payment option for accepting a range of mobile wallets at the kiosk. That's kind of like Google Pay, Apple Pay, or an RFID card that does not require a minimum balance. It does not charge fees on the remaining balance and is compatible with the electric vehicle service providers' applicable interoperability out-of-network agreements. So basically to assist in roaming type uses. And then the last one is essentially an open one that you can come to the department and the department will make a decision, and that has to be for the benefit of the public. It's kind of the biggest thing on there, and then we'll post it. It'd be up to the director on this, whether it goes like how much comment is needed and how we address that. The director at that time would determine what it is. If it's something, new and everyone's like, seems like they're good with it, might leave it at that, but I would think they'd probably go to comment on that, but it's, like I said, it's up to the director. So Yeah,
this is Paul Gardner from PSE. Can you go back to the first slide on payments? I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly.
Yeah, it's a little.
So is it sufficient to be able to take credit card, debit card payments over the phone, or is that saying we're required to do more than payment over the phone?
Yeah, no, that's if you can take those payments over the phone. So like in an easy example is you could take payment over the phone of your credit card, and that would meet the credit card part. And then you could have a contactless reader on the device, and that contactless reader could also potentially be taking mobile payment options.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments, concerns on this? And this is a good time. I mean, if you have concerns, or especially even on the comments, if you think we missed the mark on our responses to you, we can talk about that now. And then at the end, we'll also talk about, we are still, you can still provide us additional comments on this after this meeting, after you had more time to process it. And then we'll go from there. Okay, part 2, payment methods, is about conducting in foreign languages. So the electrical, we added a little bit to this, but just for a little bit of clarification, essentially that it must be installed in a commonly spoken at that location. And we made sure it also kind of brought up that is a single language on there. We looked at trying to figure out how to enforce this, but right now there's just very little that we can go off of, and I think if we tried to write language around enforcing it to be able to do really well, it'd be very long, very lengthy, and potentially may just cause issues. So I think this is one of the things right now that when we come back to rulemaking on this in a couple of years, that we may have to adjust this. If any of the sections, this may have to get adjusted more, or maybe not. I mean, to some extent, I'd hope that industry just takes it and I would expect them to do the best thing and make the most of it. If we are coming across issues, then it'll be addressed at that time. But since we don't really have anything to compare it to, it's hard to say, well, this is where there's bad actors, let's stop this from happening. It's kind of just shooting in the air right now. So we're trying to leave it open so that way development can happen, and hopefully there'll be some cool stuff that comes out of it, and kind of go from there in the future. Annabelle?
Right. Thanks, Tim. Thanks to the Washington State Department of Agriculture team. I actually had maybe 1 or 2 questions on the payment method language, but since you've already moved on, if you want to hold them till the end, I'm also fine to loop back to it.
Okay, let's take any more questions on this section, then I'll go back to the payment, go back to those for you, okay?
Thank you.
Jay?
Hi, Tim, and again, also thanks to Washington Department of Agriculture for doing this. I had the same set of questions, I think, follow-up questions as Annabelle did, so I'm happy to hold till we're done with this section.
Okay, anyone else have questions on the foreign language part?
Hey, Tim, just quick question on this piece. This perhaps is clarity for everyone on here, and is Eric at Greenlots. Just want to confirm it. It sounds like your approach to this is kind of somewhat stemming from the fact that there are no such similar comparable requirements along these lines for other refueling devices. Like there's no requirement that a gas station attendant has to speak anything other than English, and there's no requirements that the credit card reader passes stuff in languages other than English. And it sounds like you're kind of, as a result of that kind of lack of balance, are going to take a somewhat kind of lenient or approach that kind of encourages and nudges the industry to kind of develop in these ways, recognizing that it might be difficult to enforce. Just wondering if you can provide some additional thoughts or color around that, and also perhaps just address the question that I think you might be able to confirm that I started with.
Yeah, it's basically along that lines of, we don't really have anything to compare it to. So it's the department, we didn't adopt Handbook 130 EV requirements because we wanted the EV industry to develop and kind of not get in their way. And that's kind of the same thing of like, this is showing that, yes, we want you to go this direction. We give you, we're setting up kind of a marker for something that that you need to work on, but we don't really want to create a whole bunch of rules around it that end up somehow limiting what you can do. And so it's kind of just right now a little more open, long as you have justification for what you're doing. And that's the biggest thing. If we come to you and ask you, you should be able to like have a reason why you chose what you did to do, is essentially what it's leaving it at right now. Like I said, in the future, if we come across issues and there's, or as other things develop, then this might change in the future. But right now, this is, I think, looking at it and what we have to work with is our best option, and let it kind of develop from there.
That's helpful. Thanks.
Hi, Tim. This is Kelsey Johnson with Rivian, kind of on building off Eric's question there. With the idea of trying to keep this overall flexible, understand that sentiment. And I think, we definitely support, language and being included in multiple fashions here. But is there a state source that we as network providers can reference in order to determine what language should be in which area? Or is that kind of getting into the too prescriptive area that you're trying to avoid at this point?
Yeah, we don't want to reference anything and like that. I know like there's been talk about like one potential place you could look is like census data. And that'd be like kind of more of an example of, we decided to use this language or these languages because the census data for this area shows this. Is kind of, but we don't want to sit there and say that and then, have a neighborhood change or have, whatever, or just the census data isn't super accurate for the area or the state or whatever, however you're doing it. So we just, right now, we want to leave it kind of open. And then if issues arise, we'll address it from there and make changes in the future.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah, and to some extent, if, especially if you do have a huge foreign language thing, I would think as a company, you'd want to address that because that makes sure that you're hitting more customers and it's worth your time to do that. So it's kind of leaving it up to you guys to allow you to run your business to some extent and do what you think is best while still meeting some criteria.
And Tim, just a quick clarification on that. So does this go both ways? So say you do analysis in a certain geography and you determine that 98% of the people are speaking English. That doesn't absolve you from then needing to develop a solution for those 2% of folks there that might speak a different language.
Correct. You still have to have an alternative language.
That English is fine. Language. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Justin, do you have a question? Comment?
Yeah, Tim. I guess could you? I guess just kind of wanted to get a little bit more clarification on, I guess, the term means for conducting a charging session, kind of that phrase. So it sounds like you're providing a lot of open-endedness here for that to be, the networks to be able to provide those alternative language services via telephone, app, on the in-screen display. I just want to confirm that is the thinking.
Correct. That it's basically open. So whether you have it translated or you have language services provided, it would essentially meet that. You're providing a way for someone to use potentially another language to be able to initiate their charging session and to get at least the core information that they need. That way they're not, they know what they're paying and whatnot. Should essentially have the same information that you'd have that's required to show up. So.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
And Annabelle and Jay, I'm assuming your question is on the other payment stuff and not on foreign language. If it is on the foreign language, just speak up right now.
Nothing on the foreign language at this time.
Okay.
I guess I would say nothing on languages other than English at this time.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna head back to the first section of the payment methods. Okay. Annabelle?
Yeah, sorry. All right. I just had to go off on mute. Apologies.
Yeah, no problem.
Or off mute. So RCW 1994-565, subsection 1E, directs AG to adopt minimum required payment methods that are convenient and reasonably support access for all current and future users. I guess it'd be helpful if you could all elaborate on how the payment methods actually, the payment method requirements actually establish anything minimum. Our read of the rule is that there would be no changes to current industry practices and that it wouldn't meet the requirements of subsection 1E. And so I was hoping that you could expand on that.
Yeah, so far as making no changes, there's nothing in the statute that says that we're trying to make changes to current practices. This is establishing to make sure that current and future users have access. So by doing this, it gives several payment options. So hopefully someone will be able to make a payment out of a certain, be able to pick one of those three and be able to make that payment types. Like it says it may include, but it doesn't say it has to include those three. It was given the way it was written, it gives some flexibility in there. So we're leaving it up to industry to provide that flexibility. So if better payment options come about, or they can kind of develop a certain section, they can still do that. But it keeps, especially from someone that may only have a membership, if all they have is a membership, which right now you can't do, but it'd keep them from essentially, especially having just, we're just going to go with one type of payment. It opens it up so there's at least 3 different type of payments that they're doing. And even if everyone's currently doing that, it's not saying someone in the future wouldn't. And this is what would stop them from just having a single or even just 2 payment methods. It essentially require them to have at least 3 different payment options that customers could hopefully find one of those 3 they could pay with.
Yeah, and Tim, this is Glorianne. I'll go ahead and contribute to your response as well. So the primary focus of this part of the RCW is to make sure that electric vehicle service providers are providing multiple payment options, and it does not state anywhere in there that those payment options have to be standardized in any way. It specifically states that we need, when we're developing rules, that we need to focus on minimizing costs and maximizing benefits to the public, as well as making sure that we are adjusting as technology evolves. And so when it states that we are supposed to determine what the minimum payment methods are, again, it doesn't state that they're supposed to be standardized. So by us stating that the minimum requirement is that you choose 3 of the 6 options, that is us establishing what the minimum requirement is.
I also had a question about some of the equity language, if that's okay.
Yeah. I
guess I'd also think it would be helpful for you all to elaborate on how you feel you're meeting the requirements that the minimum payment methods need to facilitate access for unbanked, underbanked, and low to moderate income.
Yeah, that would be at least one of the payment methods selected must accept payment by a credit card. By a card, which is debit card, credit card, and prepaid, by use of a card number, mag strip, or EMV chip. Based off of feedback we received from you and others, it seemed like paying with a credit card was the best way to be able to meet that requirement. Because cash payment, why it would be ideal, would be very unpractical and not fall into that, finding that balance, since most charging stations, the vast majority of them are unmanned, and where they're located at aren't really associated with directly and have any direct communication with the store that they're connected to. If they're at a site, like if they're at, say, the gas station or a grocery store, they don't have access to trip those machines off a cash payment like you can with a fuel pump.
And so to me, what you all are currently proposing essentially to meet those requirements, it would like relegate someone with a prepaid card to like a toll-free number, most likely, since MagStrip is most likely not going to be offered, since it's not offered really at all by the charging providers. Just want to clarify the scenario that you foresee kind of happening from the proposed rule language.
Yeah, currently, unfortunately, yes, that would likely be true, but that's not saying that they won't be able to make electronic payments through. Well, actually, even to some extent, that's not even fully true. So a couple of things on there is there's the possibility for them to be able to recharge certain mobile apps and whatnot. There's a lot of people that are slowly moving towards even mobile apps over the prepaid credit card because they can transfer money back and forth. There's the various ways they can do that. So that's one reason I wanted to make sure they added that. And if they're using any type of contactless reader, a lot of them potentially have that capability. So there's a chance if they have that capability built in, you could have, there's certain payment methods via your phone that you don't have to have a bank account for. There's also the possibility that there could be a way for them to have a cash, recharge at a store, which would essentially be similar to prepaid cards. And then right now there's no prepaid contactless, but that's not saying there isn't prepaid contactless. Even if you look at Plug-in America submitted a document to Department of Transportation for stuff on there, and they're talking that basically the way that it alludes to is in the future they're expecting that, and they're saying basically look towards that. So currently, yes, they may not have it, but there's a good chance in the future there probably will be contactless on prepaid cards or other type of cards they have, and it's one of those things we can only do so much, but we're trying to have that balance of between having public access and also not having too much additional costs on to install EV chargers to make sure that there's enough infrastructure out there, especially since the whole purpose of this is to provide access. And the more I've read into it, it seems like access, one of the biggest things is actually just finding a station where you need, or in a charger where you need it. And if we reduce the cost of installing chargers, hopefully that will increase the number of chargers being installed throughout the state.
Thank you. And just, one last follow-up question. It looked like someone in the chat put in that a number of other providers offer magnetic strip and EMV. And I know the Department of Agriculture has stated that they want to balance the costs that they potentially are hearing about. I'm just curious, like, have you received cost data? And if so, can you share from how many providers you've received it from?
Yeah, no, we've received a little bit of cost data, not a whole lot. It's the one thing with cost data is it's after talking to several providers is there's several costs and some of them are not quite known because when you add it, you have the cost of the hardware, but then you have the additional cost of the software that is an estimation of what it's going to cost you to incorporate it, but then you also have the cost associated with maintaining that equipment. The other concern we have too is every time you add additional equipment onto something, it increases the complexity of the system, which is likely to bring down a system. And almost everything I've read, one of the biggest barriers of EV charging is equipment that's down when someone gets to the charger. And we also want to try to minimize that effect too of not having overcomplicated systems that are required by law that are causing systems to go down. And even if they can take that offline, technically if the card reader is causing them to go offline, they're no longer in compliance with the law if they take the card reader offline if it brings the system back up. So we'd have to shut it down because now that device is out of compliance. So it ends up backfiring and making things more complicated.
Yeah, I guess I'll just I don't want to take up any more time. My last question, I guess, would be for charging providers. It seems like FreeWire, I know Electrify America, and I think sometimes Greenlots offer mag, or at least EMV chip readers. And so I guess I'd be curious how often they feel that that technology brings their charging system offline or into a state where it's not functioning.
Yeah, and again, I mean, that's we're given the options, and that's not saying they can't use, you know, additional stuff and they can't go beyond. And we're just trying to leave some flexibility, but while still supplying some continuity, far as customers knowing that there's multiple methods of paying, and hopefully they can pay with one of the methods. And if they have a credit card, they can most likely pay. The other thing I go back to thinking about is if you have a consumer that is going back and keeps going back to the same charger and needs that charger on a normal basis, and they don't like calling, they will probably have that option of getting some other method, as far as getting basically signing up for an account or an RFDI card through that charger to be able to access that and not have to call. Otherwise, it's most likely incidental use. And in that case, if you just need that charger once a month, once every quarter, once a year, having to make a phone call or something is not super inconvenient when you figure you're going to be at that charger probably for 2 hours anyways.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I just want to encourage ag not to draft rules with the assumption that, like, if most people don't like toll-free numbers, it's going to push them into a system where, or it's going to push them to have to get an account, which kind of, while it's not like directly against what's in statute, it's kind of like against the intent of what's in statute. So just want to be really mindful of that. I think I'm done with my comments on payment methods for now. Thank you.
Jay?
Hi, Tim. Jay Friedland from Plug in America. So I want to sort of amplify a couple of things that Annabelle said. And I guess what I'd like to do is I think one of the ways to look at this potentially is to look at various use cases, particularly on the equity side. So, for example, if I just received my Social Security disability payment, but I have an electric vehicle, that came on a prepaid card, which is not a contactless card. And I want to also clarify that our comments were saying that, yes, contactless, I mean, basically the deployment, the diffusion of contactless cards, long term, it does look like indeed they will diffuse well and, you know, potentially faster even than EMV chip. However, I think that the sort of baseline for this is fueling, and as long as gas stations continue to accept credit cards via an EMV chip reader, and that really allows for the, you know, debit and prepaid, that we think that the EVSE should as well. And so I want to make that clear. But back to my use case. So I've just received my Social Security disability payment. It's on a prepaid card. It is an EMV chip card. And so, and that is a fairly ubiquitous form of delivery for people who are unbanked to have that card and be able to use it. Then I want to understand, it sounds like that if the EVSE did not have a chip reader, then the method of payment has to be through something like an 800 number.
Essentially, like, it doesn't have to be, they have to have a one method, and it could be through the 800 number.
Yeah, I think we would encourage you to look at the equity part of the statute, and really, I think that, at least from our read of it, it really says that we have to make this accessible for all. And if it's accessible for all, then you really have to have an allowance for the minimum kind of payment. And I guess to flip around your argument, I understand a bunch of the constraints that the industry has been, applying to this, but I want to look at it from the consumer standpoint. From the consumer standpoint, what we're trying to do is give people access to electricity, and we're trying to basically allow them to use electricity as fuel. And if we're trying to do that, then we need to make it as convenient for the consumer as possible. And I think that's really what the intent is, not necessarily for the convenience of the charging providers. And I know I'm controversial in saying that. I think that the industry has done a tremendous amount moving forward, particularly in the DC fast charging space, because they do understand that people are going to potentially use these infrequently. But one of the things we're seeing is, for example, in multifamily housing right now, people are getting, their primary charges off of L1, even for fairly long range vehicles. So they're sort of sipping overnight and getting their 40 miles that they need to commute or, do their activities for the day. And then they're going out to fast chargers. They're sort of sipping and gulping to be able to do that. And in that case, it's infrequent, but not, maybe it's once a week, or maybe it's once a month, or the like. So I don't think we should put the level of inconvenience of calling an 800 number, particularly when it's raining outside and you're basically waiting for something to happen, and having made those 800 number calls, and having, I think it would be very useful for you to survey what the response times on those are. From some survey data we have, they're, often greater than 5 minutes. That's really inconvenient for trying to make a transaction, and it's going to leave we think that will slow the adoption rate. So indeed, in some cases, in fact, in many cases, reliability of the chargers and uptime is critical, but enough charger manufacturers and enough EVSPs are providing these methods of payment already that having sort of a minimum common denominator that reaches beyond contactless, because that really kind of, if you follow the thread of where the rules are today, I think that's very, very, very important in the equity case to make sure that we're delivering access to all. Thank you.
So Tim, I'd like to provide a little more information here too on what we're thinking as we're developing these rules. Is that in the RCW 1994-565, when it talks about the rules that we're required to adopt in regards to payment methods, it does state that our responsibility is to adopt minimum payment methods in 1E that are convenient and reasonably support access to all current and future users. Now, in and of itself, those terms, convenient and reasonably support access, are discretionary and subjective to the person that's using it. So it could mean a lot of different things. So that is part of our responsibility when we're looking at developing these rules. The other parts that we've mentioned, which are also our responsibility for considering as we're adopting rules, is minimizing the cost to the industry and maximizing the benefits to the public. So as we also mentioned in that feedback response letter, supporting access to unbanked, underbanked, and low to moderate income individuals is not just about them physically being able to initiate a charging session with having limited funds. It is also about having an abundance of charging stations available to them, period. And that's where we feel that balance that we're supposed to be considering as we develop these rules in the costs that we're imposing on the industry, that's part of where that comes in. Because if we're imposing unnecessary costs to the industry, they're not going to be putting in the amount of charging stations that they could potentially be putting in. And that in itself is limiting access to those unbanked individuals. There are studies being conducted showing that one of the primary barriers for low-income individuals in adopting an electric vehicle or adopting the usage of an electric vehicle is not having reliable access to a charging station, because most likely they're going to be living in a multifamily dwelling and they can't charge at home. And so if they don't have enough stations available for them to use, even ones at their multifamily dwelling, then the likelihood that they're going to be purchasing an electric vehicle is very limited. So we are definitely wanting to encourage people to adopt the electric vehicles and use them. And we, according to the RCW and the bill, we're having to balance both sides of that. We definitely want it to be more equitable access for low income individuals to be able to initiate their charging station in a way that works for them. But we're having to balance a lot of things there. So we definitely are considering both of those things, and we're taking into consideration all of these different requirements that the RCW is putting on us when we're developing the rules.
Gloria, thanks for that additional thing. I guess you know, again, as we look at it, we really look at it through the consumer lens, and absolutely number of stations, reliability of stations, the ability for someone not to have to be a member of a club, the you know, ability to know what it costs, and the ability to just pay for it in the first place are all very, very critical you know, items. I think that, you know, the only final piece of feedback I would give is California has looked at this really, really deeply. And you know, despite the objections of the industry, I think that the incremental cost to allow greater access, I think that honestly, I think that the operations and maintenance issues, at least from what we've seen, are not dramatically impacted by the kinds of access that we're talking about, and the costs are not dramatically impacted. You know, tiny amounts of percents of cost, and with the amount of funding that is coming available to the industry, and particularly because this is for a public purpose overall, I think that you know, these are reasonable trade-offs. So we kind of land on the consumer side and want to encourage you to consider that as much as possible in terms of setting you know, sort of minimum standards. I think you guys you really are trying to do a tough balancing act. We want to encourage you to just, you know, look a little bit further on this particular issue, and maybe there's, you know, some further compromise, and we'd be happy to talk to you about that. But I think that at least in our opinion, you know, talking from EV drivers who are out there every day using this equipment, we're not quite there yet. So thank you.
Thanks, Jay. We appreciate you guys' standpoint too.
Yeah, and also, I think we also have to remember that these requirements are for devices that are funded both privately and publicly. And I think one thing we have to remember is that if it's a publicly funded grant, then that grant should, if that's a concern, then that should be addressed in those grants, not a requirement that's placed on privately funded stuff to some extent. We have the minimum requirements. That's not saying if that is an issue, that should be part of the grant process and could be added in addition to these requirements in grants. But then when it comes to the fact that we have to balance the cost, that we need to keep in mind that there's also a lot of stations that are put in through private funding that we need to make sure that we're aware of. Right, Caesar?
Yes, thank you, Tim Sessa with ChargePoint. Just really want to thank you and the department, and appreciate everybody's comments. But in general, we think that the current proposal there offers a fair balance of different payment options. And I think I just want to characterize that, we are seeing out there more and more payment providers applying different things that provide, reloadable contactless debit cards. You alluded to Square, or formerly, or now actually known as Block, where folks are able to actually load cash onto that in certain stations, right? Or to use their phone via those. So there are more and more methods out there that folks that are even unbanked or receive their benefits in this manner can do so. So characterizing it as just one scenario or two is not helpful, I think. But just that, more and more we're seeing this. So I think currently the payment options that you guys have proposed are really striking that balance in addition to cost. And there are cost studies out there, even provided by California Research Board, on what it would cost on to implement credit card readers on stations. So again, you guys have to weigh a lot of different factors and a lot of different comments, a lot of different viewpoints, but we think so far this strikes a good balance. So thank you for your effort.
Thank you. Nicholas? Nicholas Garcia, are you there still? You're still muted. You need to, there you go.
Okay. Sorry, I started talking and obviously it didn't work. Good morning, everyone. Nicholas Garcia here on behalf of public utility districts. Public utility districts in Washington State provide about 40% of the electricity delivered to retail customers. So we're a pretty big player in the industry. And, one of the things that we're looking towards is, expanding the use of electric vehicles. But we are really interested in maintaining that balance that Ms. Robinson mentioned about accessibility. The more challenging the regulations become, the fewer people who are going to be willing to accept those regulations who are offering charging stations. And I'm not sure that the balance that you have right now is the perfect balance, but I do think it's a reasonable one. And so I think we need to just be very careful that, as we are trying to make sure that these charging stations are available from an operating standpoint, but we also have to make sure that they're available in the first place. And so I just ask you to maintain that balance that you were talking about, so that you wouldn't put off people to installing them in the first place. So with that, I'd be happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Any other questions on payment methods or comments? Okay, not seeing any. I'm going to go ahead and move forward. All right, interoperability. So all publicly available at EVSE subject to the RCW must be in compliance. So we have two different things we're requiring. We have OCPI and OCPP. And OCPI, we have basically the two latest standards. And OCPP, we have 1.6 and 2.0.1. There's requests about having certifications and stuff. So I just want to point out, OCPI currently there is no one that does certifications for those. And for OCPP, the only version that can be certified is 1.6. They don't even have a test tool out yet for the 2.0.1 standard yet. And there's also a 2.0 standard that we didn't put in there. That was based off this input we received from various people, that essentially the 2.0 had issues or is inadequate, and they came out with the 2.0.1 essentially soon afterwards to correct those issues, and no one's using the 2.0. So that's what we have there. So the whole getting the certification, there's some issues with that, and we kind of tried to address balance as far as of getting certified and at least providing some type of enforcement for us to be able to somewhat enforce that. So what we've gone through is essentially you have to provide documentation to us that you're in compliance with those protocols. Essentially, that could be through a third-party certification. So that would be with OCPP, you could end up having to go through the certification process, or you can self-attest. Part of the self-attestation is now you have an extra legal document out there saying that your device is in compliance. And essentially that would just, if someone had any proof that it wasn't in compliance, now it'd make it easier for us to try to enforce that. It's very hard at this point, just for the fact that there's only the 1.6 that can get certified. And then on top of that, even the certification process is you have a test tool that they recommend buying software for, which is against the statute to require that, but it's not a required thing. You could still be able to go through that whole thing without doing that. So it doesn't quite limit it. It's just kind of a little goofy the way that works. And then also, if you don't have a membership, which is another thing, then you end up having to pay an additional fee to get that certification. So it's kind of given the option. So if you go the certification route, it's the easiest, best way, because now it's a third party saying that you're in compliance. If you self-attest, now you're taking that liability onto yourself, saying that you're in compliance with that requirement. Any questions on this? Comments? Michael?
Thanks, Tim. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Terrific. So this is Michael Krauthammer, and I'm representing the Alliance for Transportation Electrification. The Alliance for Transportation Electrification. First, we want to thank you and your colleagues on the staff for your reasoned and reasonable development of these regulations. We are active in several dozen states around the country, and the process that you have been running here in Washington is really a model, we believe, for other states to follow. So we think it's important to just let you know that, up front, because it's we don't see it everywhere. So turning to the language itself, the provision about being capable of using OCPP is certainly well-intentioned, but it's too broad. It's too vague. It's important to require both the technical and contractual ability for an EVSE owner to port its EVSE to another network without the consent of the existing network. So we've written about this in our comments, and we've spoken about it in prior calls. It is a two-part test. One without the other doesn't work. Similar to the cell phone model that we talked about before, about porting your phone from one carrier to another. So we want to reiterate that position very strongly, because this is too broad to accomplish the desired outcome. Now, with regard to testing, there is an organization called the Open Charge Alliance, and the OCA is the global clearinghouse for OCPP. This is undisputed. OCA has arranged for testing labs on multiple continents for both hardware and software to be independently certified. You wrote in your comments that there's only one lab in the US. Currently, there is a lab on the East Coast. A second lab is being opened on the West Coast. Other labs are located in Asia, in Europe, and other parts of the world, located near many of the hardware manufacturers. The reason that there aren't more facilities is that the volume today is relatively low. And if this relatively small number of tests were to be spread across a larger number of labs, then the cost of training and performing the tests would be higher. And so the purpose of consolidating the tests among a smaller number of facilities is actually to make the testing faster and cheaper. There are lots of other specialized products out there in our economy that have only one or two repair or maintenance facilities. You know, if you have a watch from a certain company, or you know, TVs, we don't really fix TVs anymore, but if you have any number of devices that you need to send out to repair, it may only go to one or two facilities in the country. And so in this day and age of, you know, inexpensive and rapid shipping, as well as the ability to test a lot of devices remotely, we don't believe that the presence of two facilities, one on each coast, is any impediment at all to companies obtaining the testing. With regard to the position that you also described, both in your written comments as well as in your verbal comments a moment ago, that paying for certification could in some way be contrary to the statute's prohibition on licenses or other fees. We also disagree respectfully with that. We see OCPP certification, quite frankly, as extremely important and valuable to the consumer, and also extremely comparable to a certification such as UL, which no one opposes. So with that, we strongly recommend independent third-party certification as the gold standard. Now, if the department continues to accept an alternative to independent third-party certification, we believe that the self-attestation as written in the current rule is extremely concerning. There's no detail around what the attestation must contain, and there's also no means of verifying the purported or claimed compliance. So we propose that as an alternative, EVSE manufacturers and EVSPs, because it's a two-sided issue, they both have to have the compliance, at the very least, provide a documented roadmap to the department. The roadmap should specifically detail their plans for obtaining independent certification. The roadmap should include target dates and milestones, or an explanation of why they're not pursuing this. And in the interim, we strongly support both EVSE manufacturers and EVSPs to use the test tool that you also mentioned a moment ago. It's called the Open Charge Test Tool. It's developed by the internationally recognized Open Charge Alliance. It is the test tool that companies use in order to prepare. It's essentially like before you take the SATs. You take your SAT prep course. The OCTT, the Open Charge Test Tool, is essentially the prep course for the actual test. It's a perfectly reasonable cost of doing business. It's something that has analogs in many other industries that require testing and standards. The OCA is a nonprofit organization. The reason that there is a cost for using the test tool is simply that there is a cost to developing and maintaining the test tool. It is true that there are two different fees for it. It's not unreasonable that companies that pay annual memberships to be a member of this nonprofit organization are effectively already paying for the development of the tool through their membership fees in part. And so it's quite reasonable that they get a lower price than others who are not contributing to the maintenance of this organization. So the Open Charge Test Tool is a perfectly reasonable and widely accepted methodology for ensuring compliance. We believe that you should require it in the absence of actual testing. Moreover, the test results should specify the model or version number being tested, and the complete report should be made available both to the department and to the public. So I know we've said a lot here, but we thank you very much for having this session and listening to our comments.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the other, and I don't know if you have any input on this, Michael, with that only the test tool and certification is only available for 1.6 and not the 2.0.1 currently. So that's the other thing is like we'd have to require one, but the other one's just kind of open there.
I would have to look to the OCA's website. I certainly don't want to take everyone's time on this call today, but they are the organization that maintains the both the protocol and the testing. And so the presumption is that as soon as all of the stakeholders agree on the methodology for performing the testing for the 2.0 version, that it will be made available. And so it wouldn't be unreasonable for the department to adopt the standards today with the, certainly there would be a justification for industry participants to not get the test if the test isn't yet ready. And then when it is a bit ready, then they would get the test.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and I did check this morning and it's still not available. So just, and then far as requiring even if we just require them to run the test tool, we specifically can't require them to run the test tool because the requirements, we're restricted to that we can't require someone to purchase licensing or software, and that's the software. So it's something we could.
Well, you're not requiring them to purchase the software. They can get the certification.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm just saying.
You can go get the certification. And they don't need to do the test tool.
Yeah. I'm just saying, even in lieu of would have to require the certification, not software, not the test tool. Test tool would be an option.
No, I understand. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then there may be other ways over time that companies can demonstrate their compliance with OCPP. Like I said, right now they can get the actual certification. As an alternative to that, they can go out and get the test tool, and over time there may very well become additional means for them to satisfy your requirements. I mean, you could also provide waivers, upon a reasonable showing that there's another alternative that comes about between now and the time that you come back and revise the regulations. But presumably that justification would have to be comparable to the existing provisions. Yeah.
The other thing we also have to keep in mind is if we do add anything where we have a significant amount of review process, that's going to add significantly to our costs as an agency to administer this program, which would likely end up having us add an additional fee to the registration of the devices, because we'd have to get someone that's technically capable of reviewing that and pay them appropriately to be able to do that, and that would just be an extra burden on the program financially, so we'd have to increase the registration fee.
Well, we weren't suggesting that the department itself perform the tests. What we were saying is that applicants could, if there were a third means by which an applicant could satisfy the requirement, separate from independent certification, separate from OCTT, they would explain to the department what this third methodology is. You would administratively, review their letter and then weigh in on whether it satisfies the same level of scrutiny. There wouldn't really, the cost would only be the cost of reviewing the letter and then writing a response. We understand time is money, but at the same time, this is an industry that is clearly growing, yet still in the early stages. And so we understand that the volume isn't yet there in the fees, but every expectation is that there will soon be plenty of EVSEs out there to support your budget.
All right, thank you. All right, Chris.
Thanks, Tim. Just quickly, I'm Chris King with Siemens. We're not a member, but we would support ATE's comments, in particular the certification requirement, as well as the requirement that EVSPs be commercially acceptable to connecting chargers to different networks as they discussed. My focus really is on OCPI, which we're aware of and we support as a standard, and is used widely to connect from one cloud to another cloud, from one software platform to another. So we support that. I guess I have a question about requiring OCPI in the EVSE itself. We're not aware of that happening, and we don't understand why that would be of interest. In other words, at the cloud level, absolutely great standard should be used, but not in the EVSE itself. EVSE communicating back to the cloud using OCPP typically, and then from one cloud to another using OCPI.
Yeah, I think our intent on that is so it's the EVSP shall at a minimum maintain it on every. So essentially, if you have a charger, that charger has to be part of that system, is what it's saying. It's not. That's why it's saying the EVSP shall at a minimum maintain OCPI standard on every. So that they can't, because we just said the every service provider must maintain it. You could say, okay, yeah, I have 5 chargers over here in the corner of the state that are OCPI, but the rest of them aren't, and you'd be meeting that qualification. This is saying that every charger is essentially part of that system.
Okay, which we would support, but I think you need to change the wording a little bit, just to, as you just described it, because you don't actually put OCPI into the charger itself, but it's the charger is part of that system that works with OCPI to communicate to across networks.
I'm just writing that down. Hold on. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, Justin.
Yeah, I would just a quick statement of support for generally the way that Department of Agriculture has crafted this section. I think as the conversation around OCPP indicated, it's a fluid state right now, and then just fundamentally, yes, the Open Charge Alliance does exist, but at the end of the day, it's a nonprofit, membership-based organization, not an international standards-making body. So not going through the same processes that we would see at an IEC or another ANSI type organization. So, I think in particular, absent, finalization of any, protocols for from an international standards making body, flexibility here is important. And then, yeah, I did look up the there is no test tool for the most recent versions. And so it just complications in getting to in standards right now could lead to some unintended consequences. So thank you for the flexibility there.
All right, thank you. Eric?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Appreciate all the work that's been done here, and listening to stakeholder feedback and providing thoughtful responses in your document. Agree with a lot of what's been said here. I do think there's still opportunity to kind of to put a finer point and be a little bit more precise, especially with respect to the intent and how these 2 provisions get to the intent. So we'll be excited to provide some further comment there and work with you all to kind of achieve what it says it's trying to achieve. I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments on this? And also just wanted to point out, because I've had comments before, I know we addressed it inside the response, but we really can't do a or later standard on this, so we were kind of stuck with calling out standards just the way that we adopt different standards. Even if you look at Department of Ecology, when they adopt a lot of California's requirements, it's always, they'll say California requirement on a such and such date. It's just, there's some case law out there on it, and it's essentially, if we try to do or later, it would probably get challenged in court, and the whole thing would, or that section would get thrown out. So we want to avoid that. All right. So one of the things we're not doing is we're not doing any rules for additional reporting. Especially looking at it, it was our authority is for additional reporting on things that would help us enforce this rule. And at this point, we don't see the need for that. That could change in the future, especially after Handbook 44 is changed up. And then with the rules that we currently have and the way they're set in this draft, we believe we should be able to accomplish all that stuff under the current fees that we have. I do want to point out, though, once Handbook 44 language is changed from tentative to actual permanent code, and we adopt that and start enforcing Handbook 44, and that's the Handbook 44 would be all the metering, and any of the requirements around the display showing the overall price and the cumulative, or the price per kilowatt and all that. Those requirements that are in Handbook 44, when the inspector's out there, that's going to greatly increase our costs due to both the time the inspector's out there, but also the equipment and training that's going to be involved in that. So that will most likely have a fee increase. And the nice thing is, by doing it that way, we'll have more of an idea of what's out there, what's registered, and have an idea what's coming through. And also on the handbooks, as far as Handbook 44 adopting, it's a lengthy process. So if you never really looked at how the NCWM makes changes to the NIST Handbook 44 and 130, and also 133, which doesn't cover EV stuff, is that starts off, there's amendments are proposed in fall, and then they're at a regional meeting, and they have to pass that. Then they get discussed in January, and then the earliest they get voted on would be that July, but then they don't go into effect till the following January. So essentially, it's like a year and a third process to get from proposed to actually published and in effect. And oftentimes, the NIST handbooks, or the NCWM working on those handbooks, is very particular. It's usually not a 1-year process. It usually ends up taking 2 cycles to go through all that to get changed. Sometimes it takes longer. So it's going to be a couple more years until Handbook 44 is actually adopted for testing as far as the accuracy of the devices and all the metering. Handbook 130 is already there. We haven't adopted it before, but all the stuff that's in Handbook 130 is essentially adopted in statute, just worded differently. So when we go to do adoption, which is hopefully maybe this fall, we'll probably be adopting Handbook 130 as far as the EV chargers, but it wouldn't really be changing it wouldn't be adding any additional regulations, because it's just a lot of it's already incorporated, and it's mostly what's the display. If you look at the statute, the requirements, I'll tell you what section. I think it's section 3 or 4. It's section 4. So essentially, this is abbreviated version of what's in Handbook 130. So any questions on that? Okay, Glorianne, do you want to go over the next steps and process that we're following?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So where we're at right now is, as you probably know, we've already filed the CR 101, which is the first step in the rulemaking process. And we are still working on some information gathering, specifically when it comes to analyzing the impact of the rule on the industry, the businesses that'll be affected by it. So one of the big things that we're focused on right now is determining if any small businesses in Washington State are going to be impacted by that rule. And if so, then we're going to be looking at the impact to those small businesses versus the large businesses that'll be impacted. And so there's a decent amount of analysis that will need to go into that if in fact we determine that small businesses will be impacted. So once we get all of that analysis work done, we get that final proposed language finished, then we'll be filing the CR 102, which includes that official proposed language as well as analysis potentially that we will be conducting. So you'll have the ability to read through those documents as well. Potentially, we're looking at anywhere between 2 to 4 months before we'll be ready to file the CR 102. So once that is filed, we'll move into the public comment period, which really starts as soon as that CR 102 is filed, and generally about 20 days after the CR 102 is filed, we'll have the public hearing. You can either submit your official public comments to those proposed rule changes, either written, or you can attend the hearing and provide those comments orally like you're doing now. And at that point, the director will decide which direction he wants to go and either adopt the rule or not. And we have to adopt the rule by January 1st, 2023. And as part of that adoption, we'll also be providing a document called a concise explanatory statement where we provide the department's response to any public comments that were received during the official public comment period. And as you know, in the bill, even though we're adopting the rule on January 1st, 2024, we're not allowed to have the rule be effective until January 1st, we're adopting on January 1st, 2023. The rule won't be effective until January 1st, 2024.
Right, thank you. Yeah, and it's kind of weird because a lot of rulemaking, you'll see they already have some kind of proposed rules going into it, but in our case, this is all new to us. So we've kind of, our CR 101 and what we're doing now, taking a whole bunch of public comments people aren't used to because usually they're kind of already there and they just move right into the 102. But hopefully we'll have a workable product doing this way in our 102 process. Why this is being extended quite a bit, the 102 should be a fairly short, easier, or maybe not short, but at least an easier process than some other times. Annabelle?
Yeah, thank you, Tim and Gloria, and this is super helpful. Appreciate you providing an overview of the timeline. I think I heard, Gloria, that you said that you think CR 102 could take up to 2 to 4 months to release. And I know that the second round of draft rule language was released, I think, sometime last week. Are you all still accepting comments on that second round of draft rule language? Oh, looks like it. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yep, nope, that's okay.
Yeah, we
Good
definitely
question.
accepting comments on the second draft rule language that, any comments received today, we're taking all of that into consideration as we move forward and as we're looking at analyzing the rule language that we've got and how that affects everybody. So yeah, as this slide says, if you can provide us your comments to the current draft, the second draft, by February 10th, that would be great.
Yeah, and if for some reason that's the one I see, when you get to the CR 102 and those public comments, those are official public comments, there will be a hard date on that. This date, if you're a couple days late, we'll probably still be able to incorporate it, but we need to start reviewing to keep this process moving. That's why, especially the last I know you guys had a really short turnaround on comments on the first draft, but we're trying to keep this process moving, and we're just trying to get the comments in, and that way we can get the language developed to where it needs to be on time. So that way we can file at 102, CR 102, and get it through there. So yeah, if you can get it to us by February 10th, that way we can start reviewing those comments, and we can make adjustments as needed. Even if you spoke it today, it helps if you just put those in writing for us, so that way it reminds us of those. Because especially my comments during the meeting are not nearly as exact as what you could probably put in writing yourself. So we'd like to see those. That way we can make any other adjustments. After we review those and go through it, we'll determine if we need to do another meeting like this, or maybe if we might just send those, if it's just a fine-tuned draft of adjusting some language and a couple other things, then we might send that just back out and kind of see what your guys' response are and see if we need to have another meeting or not from there. And we'll just we want to work from there. Right now, we don't know exactly what that's going to look like, so just stay tuned. And in the past, we kept talking about putting on a listserv. You'll still keep receiving emails how you have been. We have not been able to figure out how to get a listserv set up for this for the agency with all the changes that have been made. So just bear with us with that. And if you have any questions on any of it, interpreting it, whatnot, just let us know. And then the other thing is on the comments is that you can start and it'll be inside the spending the emails, but start sending the comments for these to the WSDA rules comments at agr.wa.gov email. That way, if it's just, especially as we're getting more finalized, and these we want to make sure those are all there and tracked properly. And that phone number is my phone if you have any questions on this.
Hey, Tim, is that WSDA rules comments email on the web page?
Let's see. Glorian, do you know?
Yes, it's in the section about public comments, the comment period.
Awesome, thank you. It's just helpful reference.
My email or do you know where it's at, Glor? Is it
right there?
Right there. So towards the bottom.
Yeah.
Submitting written comments, it's in that section. And there's also, if you look, there's an email or a snail mail if you want to do that too.
Yeah, I personally would prefer to get an email for all of those things, since since we're all teleworking, it's just a lot more efficient to not get a written letter. I mean, it's totally allowable if that's the only way to do it, but if an email is possible, that's preferred. Are there any other questions that anybody had before we wrap up the meeting? Paul, your comment there about will the slide deck be available after the meeting? Yes, I'll get it posted to the website. Along with the video itself from the meeting.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.